Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Undercurrents, the Seton Park Dome. Yes. We got a great one for you today. Today, we are very proud to be bringing to our airwaves for the first time, and hopefully not the last, John Scanlan from Riverdale. Yes. John has a great perspective on the dome, and we're very excited to have him come on and talk about it. And of course, we're just excited in general because this project that we're doing, this investigation into sociological and cultural anthropological history of Riverdale is quite simply fascinating. The things that we're learning about my own neighborhood, I never knew, particularly the social networks that existed, the interconnectedness between the high elites and, of course, what I call their minions, the people in the mental health fields, the people in the media, who were all financed ultimately by this Dodge Foundation, which held court and held sway in Riverdale for so many years, and in many ways still does to this very day. So John's going to be great. We're really looking forward to him today. And of course, as you know, we cannot do this alone. Or, as I always like to say, it ain't about me. It's about we. So may I introduce to you one of the men of the hour, the one. Moet, I think you're going to want to get ready for this one. The only Eric Galati. Yes, Eric. How are you, sir?
Blessed Sunday and happy St. Joseph's Day to everybody. Listen, Manny, what is incredible about this investigation and historical research, as I wrote when you showed the film on your interview with Tom Martin, who was the first person you ever interviewed, either of us did, you alone, is that we get answers to each question we've had, and it's like the head of a hydra. Many more questions start to appear.
Absolutely.
As we go through this show, I will eventually go through two news items we already had, but things that are overlooked, and also the perplexing paradox, which I will explain and which we have already spoken about. Now, I want to say to everybody, because of an emergency that happened at my house last night, I may mute and go away for a while. I have to be respectful to a mechanical engineer who's working here, just to let him know something. But without further ado, we have a very special guest, another participant in the Dome People project, Mr. John Scanlan, and he will be giving his own unique biographical perspective fairly, without any prejudice, any scandal, but it is his personal experience, just as Ishelle had her personal experience and Tom Martin has had his personal experience. So please give a good welcome to a man who has volunteered to come here. He volunteered. And John, welcome.
Thank you. It's very nice to see you, Eric, and very good to see you, Manny.
John, it's certainly our pleasure. And I got to say, well, of course, I liked you immediately, but I was thinking about who you reminded me of, and forgive me if this is not the greatest thing to hear, because I always wonder when people say you remind me of someone, I always look at them a little weird, but you remind me of Gene Shepherd, the great storyteller. Do you?
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, I consider that a great honor. Thank you very much. I really,
You kind of have the same vibe about you.
I would have never considered myself in that category, but thank you. I greatly appreciate the unwarranted accolade.
You're quick with your speech.
You're very welcome, John. And of course,
you're never in limbo.
And of course, it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. So we got quite a bit to get to today. We're gonna be getting into some heavy topics today. Actually, not only John has his, as we're calling it, unique perspective on the dome, But we're also going to get into a little bit of the sociological and cultural anthropological issues extant in Riverdale, especially in those years, the 60s, 70s, and of course going into my years, into the 80s and 90s. Not so much anymore, but certainly something that existed. And that, of course, is the issue of the relationship between the Jews and the Irish people, which we're gonna talk about. And of course, John, you're Irish, so you're the first. Yeah, it was Scanlan. How could I have ever guessed that?
Right.
So you're the first Irish kid that we've had on, which is, of course, is amazing, because we want every perspective. But we're also going to get into some heavy topics that aren't necessarily directly related to the Dome project. I just want to say it right up front. But we will be talking today about the Horace Mann sex scandal. And of course, Horace Mann is a very exclusive private school here in Riverdale. And in looking at some of these articles, actually, not only have I found some connections to some of the people associated with this Riverdale mental health, but we're also, Eric, we're going to read an article where we relate it back up to Yonkers and our Son of Sam investigation. Horace Mann. That's a little surprise for you later today.
Oh, that's great. And in fact, I think that the mental health clinic is kind of like the knot that ties a few of these strands together. I never thought that, and I came across it, and it will be interesting. I wish we had more biographical, historical input on this.
I agree, but let's get right into it. So, John, tell us how you came to the neighborhood of Riverdale, and while you're talking...
I came right. I was born there. I mean, my parents had lived in Riverdale since 1954. I was born in 59, so you know.
So you were so you're a Riverdalian, tried and true, just like I am.
I'm as born and bred as one can be, and I mean, I literally remember the day, we lived across the street from 141, the 141 campus.
So let's just show that.
On Hudson Manor.
So let's just show that real quick for everybody. Well, first of all,
Right.
Zooming out, we have Riverdale right over here, this corner of the Northwest Bronx. I guess Eric had to take off for a second, so we'll take him off screen until he comes back. So this corner of the Northwest Bronx here, and you grew up at 3750. We can give this address because you no longer live there, but 3750 37 Hudson Manor Terrace, which is right here. These buildings,
right there, right where you've got that. That's you're hitting my terrace.
All right, let's get your terrace. So this was your terrace.
On that terrace, that's our apartment.
So you were lucky. You lived on the top floor. You had no upstairs neighbors. Oh, that's a luxury.
Correct.
So of course you were right across the street from 141, which is right here, and everybody watching our show is very familiar with that campus already. Right. And of course, across the street we have PS 24. And just so everyone can see how close you grew up near the Dome was right here in Seton Park.
Right. Now, that's just to give anybody who doesn't quite understand the sort of the geography. Where this big white building is, if you go right there,
right here,
that is Hudson Manor. That's Manor Towers, 3671 Hudson Manor Terrace. That's the hill. That's quite a steep hill there,
right?
And so we literally lived at the top of that hill,
right? Exactly. It inclines up from here, and then right here it levels out.
Any place I went was downhill, and then I had to come back uphill to get home. No matter what I was doing, it was downhill then uphill.
So real quick, what did your parents do for a living? Just so we can get an idea as to.
My parents were both lawyers.
They were both lawyers.
My mother was this being the 1950s and 1960s, there was no such thing as, mommy track or anything like that. And no one, just no one would accept the idea that an American woman wouldn't be home with her children,
right,
tending to her children when they were young kids. So I mean, my mother had just a very brief background. She graduated from law school just before World War II and tried to stay connected to my father during the war while he was being transferred all around the United States in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
They come back to New York, and she had a very hard time getting a job because there was a law firms that just said to her flat out to her face, "You're not a lawyer, you're a woman."
How did she argue against that?
Well, she just, I have to say I've always had a great deal of respect for my mother in terms of how she always dealt with the whole, what gets commonly referred to as the feminist issue.
Mm-hmm.
She was the type that just was like, she didn't get upset. She didn't scream. She didn't, make a scene or anything. She just kept pushing, very gently pushing. And she was able to get her foot in the door with a very prominent Wall Street law firm right after World War II.
Do you remember the name of that law firm?
It's no longer in
it doesn't matter. Our audience wants to investigate every possible law firm and name that comes up on this show. So do you remember the name?
Yes, Wicks, Riddell, Bloomer, Jacoby, McGuire. It was a very top-notch firm, and they quote unquote let her work in the library just to see if because they couldn't. I mean, even doing that was a very progressive thing.
Right.
Because it was just not done. And to have, somebody to be able to process the concept that a woman went to law school, took and passed the bar exam, and had the same education as the men, and you mean we should treat her the same way that we treat men? Well, I know we can't quite, grasp that, but we'll see how it goes.
Right.
And she started off as a librarian, and then after a couple of years, when she was given small little assignments and showed that she knew exactly as much as any man did, they finally put her on the legal staff. But, she understood that that's, the way it was. And she just didn't bitch and complain about it. She was just like, I got work to do.
Right, exactly.
What did she specialize in?
Well, she ended up going into the area of what's called trusts and estates. People's wills, things like that. Any kind of, setting up trust funds, things like that.
So very interesting. So both your parents are lawyers, and
yes.
And you live in Riverdale, and of course you grew up in the Riverdale of the 50s, which let's show some pictures of this because it's pretty amazing actually. So everybody remember what we just saw in Google Earth and all the buildings and everything. Now we're going to look at.
Well, I can tell you, I very, very clearly remember the day that 237th Street was paved.
Really?
Because yes, prior to that, it was just this kind of mashed, gravelly. It's kind of basically what is below the
dirt,
below the blacktop,
right?
And they just they cut the road through and then just left like that there in the lower
right here,
right-hand corner.
Right here would have been right around here would have been your building.
Right, but that's 237th Street there
right
in
here.
yes. prior to the building of 141 in 1957.
Correct. 141 is on this right here, this piece of property right here.
Correct.
And
My guess is that that picture must have been taken in 1956.
Yes, because PS24 was built in 53. So it was there already, as we see here, PS24.
Right.
Now, Seton Park was not Seton Park. It was Elizabeth Seton Hospital. We're going to look at a few more pictures, but the dome would have been right about here. So let's take a look at some of these. These are amazing photographs.
Right.
So this is
a lot of people don't really. That was the original Seton Hospital where the Whitehall literally stands
to this day. Exactly. Which is 3333 Henry Hudson Parkway for those who want to look that up.
Now, what people need to understand, sort of the historical perspective on this. This was a tuberculosis hospital, which was a significant thing in those days because, certainly prior to World War II and even in the few years after the war, if you were contracted tuberculosis, it would take, even under the best of circumstances, even if you were otherwise didn't have any other, medical problems, it would take at least 9-10 months to a year to recuperate. And there were these tuberculosis hospitals were built all over New York and the rest of the United States that were designed specifically. They tried to put them in more sort of rural areas where the quote unquote air was better.
Right.
That was considered, a lot of people, went upstate New York. Saranac Lake, the town of Saranac Lake was big on tuberculosis hospitals.
My maternal grandfather worked at that hospital in Saranac Lake. Even though he was Puerto Rican, he went to Columbia University Medical School, graduated in 1930, and he worked up at that hospital in Saranac Lake. I think his residency was up there.
Yeah, that was Saranac Lake was, as I say, practically founded on tuberculosis.
Hey, look, real quick. There seems to be some form of dome here already on the.
It looks like a little, what I would call a gazebo.
Gazebo, right?
Yeah.
And so so this is Seton Park right here. Yeah. So I'm sorry. Carry on.
And basically, when my parents first moved to Riverdale in 1954, they lived just on the east side of the Parkway in Riverdale Towers, 3103 Fairfield Avenue.
Okay.
And
I think we have a picture of that.
Their apartment faced the Parkway.
Right here.
That's okay. No. You're a little too far north. Because that was the old Baptist.
Right. Yes, it would be more down towards here. Okay.
Correct. But it's the same thing, overlooking the Parkway.
Uh-huh.
And apparently the stories, I literally was not yet alive. My parents talked about the night of the big fire at Seton Hospital.
So that's for everybody's in the audience that's right here. I'm going over again. We're now looking at it from the other side, from the Hudson River side. Just so everybody knows, PS24 hadn't even been built yet in this picture. That would have been right about here. 141 was right about here. Here's the hill going up to John's building. And interestingly enough, this is the building I grew up in right here.
Yes.
Fieldstone Gardens. Yeah, it was there. Yeah, in those years. So the fire at Seton Hospital
would have been probably I'm guessing 1955, and quote unquote, to be a little bit what's the word I'm looking for? Suspicious. Conveniently happened right after the widespread beginnings of antibiotics that basically changed, because as I was saying, when you were in the olden days, when you got tuberculosis,
It was air.
You had
air cured
right.
you.
And you had to go to these places for at least a year. And then after World War II, when the widespread use of antibiotics came along, and boom, all of a sudden, the treatment for TB has complete. You get your antibiotics and you kind of stay home for a couple of weeks at most.
Right. And then all of a sudden, this fire happens.
Right. So I'll let anybody who wants to think what they want to, they can.
Right, exactly. But I find these pictures amazing because, I mean, it's just unbelievable how built up Riverdale is compared to these days. And this was the country. And of course, down here is Palisade Avenue, which is where Alfred Hunt Howell lives, somewhere, a little bit north of here.
Right.
And right here is where your your building would have been more off camera to the right.
Yeah. Correct.
But let's see what.
So, So what happened was there was the big fire in, as I believe it was either 55 or early 56, that basically shut down all of the Seton Hospital operations.
Now, so all right. So here's a picture of Riverdale. Clearly, now it's been a little bit more built up here. This is probably
This is so you're seeing
here your building.
That's my building, and then the whole 141 campus is not
there yet.
Built in. That's where. So this picture has got to be. My building was built in 54, as you said. 24. The first part, the old part of 24, was built in 53, and a lot of people don't realize is the extension that was built in 66, which is that what you see today is not one building. It's actually two buildings. If you walk along 236th Street, what you're walking past is actually two buildings. There's the old building. It was built in 53, and then the expansion.
Oh, interesting.
The other half of the building was built in 66, and I very clearly remember that under construction.
Right. So then what happens to the Seton Hospital after it burns down?
Apparently the main building was left as a ruin for several years. And then I don't actually have any kind of personal recollection of the building, but by the time I was old enough to know what was going on, the building itself had been torn down, and it was just left as it was just torn down, and that's it.
Did anybody ever hang out in the abandoned superstructure? Because I love abandoned places. It's like one of my favorite things.
Well, there was another structure on the property that was literally facing on to 235th Street, and if you from
right here,
that could be it. That building was also kind of, I don't know how then there were all these other quote unquote fires that seemed to happen, because I remember that being that building being there, but completely, in ruins.
Right. And here we have Tom Martin. Abandoned Seton Hospital was spooky, so we got to get Tom Martin back to.
So Tommy is just a few years older than me, too. He remembers the actual main structure, which I don't. And then that whole piece of property, I think there was kind of a whole lot of, nobody knew what the hell they were doing between the city and whoever was the,
right.
The legal heir of the hospital, whatever that. nobody knew what the hell they were doing, and they just let it sit there.
Right, and when the dome comes in, which we will.
Well, let me wait. There's a few steps before we get to the
Well,
dome.
of course, but I'm just moving ahead. When the dome comes in, though, those buildings are razed. There's no more buildings.
Are completely
gone, and it was just, but it was not yet officially Seton Park. It was just an abandoned.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
It was the woods.
But it also brings forth the question, with the elite old American money that was all over Riverdale, the Dodgers, Howells, and so forth, it makes one question what responsibility or what activity within the community did they have other than the local government? You would think that such great wealth that had previously created such a beautiful neighborhood would not just sit back, but instead that seems to be the case.
Well, but the problem, Eric, was that there was, I think, at that very historical point, there were issues. There was still issues of ownership to be resolved.
It was private property.
Yeah, you couldn't just, no matter how bountiful you want to be, you can't just walk onto a piece of property and fix it because you feel.
Was that government owned or private?
No, my understanding was that there was still this. It was a big question mark, and what was the status of the organization that previously operated the hospital,
right?
And what was their ongoing status? And it was sort of this kind of. That's why everything was just left as a mess. I think they tore down the main building just because of it was a hazard, a safety hazard, and I mean you can. It's pretty easy for a local government to tell a property owner you have to, if there's a building that has had a serious fire or other kind of existential damage, you can say, look, guys, you just have to tear that down. You can't.
Right.
This is a hazard.
So one of the things when we first spoke to you, when we got in touch with you for the first time, I mean, you're like a wealth of old, well, I call it old, but you know what I mean, old Riverdale knowledge.
Yeah, right? That's true.
One generation before me, which is always interesting. Now, you had mentioned, and this is something that I remember as wisps as a child, but to you it was real. You had mentioned that there was a place called Villa Bella Vista.
Yes, Villa Bella Vista was which I happen to have had an actual connection with, because in our apartment building there were a ton of kids. I mean, this was the way life was in Riverdale in those days. Everybody's apartment building was loaded with kids, and there was, everybody you were, all of your friends, were in, various different apartments, and you went to the playground together and all of that.
Right.
And there was a family. Now, there had been there was actually, interestingly, in our less than diverse, prior years, there were a number of Asians, mostly Japanese, in the neighborhood because they were the first generation of the Japanese expats that came to work in the United States after World War II.
I remember there were quite a few Japanese when I was in PS24, but they were the only quote unquote ethnic minority. We didn't really have that many blacks or Hispanics in our school in those years.
And there was in our building, there was a family that were actually Burmese, and there were the two kids, Sonny and May, who were basically, I was, May was 2 years younger than me, and Sonny was like 2 years older than me.
So Villa Bella Vista was on this property at 232nd and Palisade Avenue, which
Correct.
is just behind. Well, just so we can give people a little perspective, going back to the Seton Park,
Right.
that would have been down in this.
Yes. That's where the cursor is right now.
Right about there. Right
Correct.
about there would have been Villa Bella Vista. And what was Villa Bella Vista for people?
Well, I heard that Villa Bella Vista had been originally built. It might have been a Delafield house, family house.
And of course, the Delafields, for those in the audience, are one of the 3 founding families of Riverdale. You had the Dodges, the Perkins, and the Delafields.
Those were the 3 most wealthy in the hierarchy of wealth.
Right, exactly.
Riverdale.
And and so that's my understanding is that's how the house got built in the first place. And then in right around 1960,
1962 here at Riverdale Press.
Right, was when Utant, who became growing up in Riverdale, I actually at one time used to know exactly the order of who had been the Secretary Generals of the United Nations. It was Trygve Lie and Dag Hammarskjöld, and then let's see, I think there was
Bealey. I think there was a guy named Bealey who lived in Villa Bella Vista before Utant.
Oh, okay. Well, that's possible. And then Utant, and so I was literally friends in the from the playground with his grandchildren, and they would invite us, the kids from the playground, to come down to Grandpa's house to go swimming in their pool and just use the swings and just have a good time.
It's funny that you mentioned that pool, because in my day in Riverdale, that pool was abandoned and completely cracked up and broken, and there was always like teenagers hanging out in there smoking weed, and
but in the house when it was the home of the Secretary General of the United Nations.
I want to talk about that a little more. Eric, you had a question?
Was Utant? I remember him on television as a boy, but was Utant Burmese?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, and I want to ask something, because we are talking about the socioeconomic in Riverdale. To both of you, these Japanese were, at that time you usually looked at the Japanese as the elite Oriental Asians.
Yeah.
Were they all well off, and also your experience at school?
Well, they were literally, Eric, let me explain. They were what is the term of art is expats. They were corporations, mostly profit-making Japanese, like Toyota and Sony and Mitsubishi. Everybody knows all those names. After World War II, by the late 1950s, they were beginning to, come into the United States and, begin operations. And these were the families of their employees, and these people would come for 2 years, and the companies had the leases on the apartments, and they would just switch out the staff every 2 years,
Right. I'm sorry, John.
A new family would come, and 2 years later they'd leave, and a new family would come in. Now there was also some Japanese government people associated with the United Nations. And in fact, what a lot of people don't realize is the Empress of Japan, as of today, Empress Masako, lived up in Skyview and went to PS 81.
Oh man! So
what's his daughter?
Excuse me?
The Emperor Hirohito's daughter.
No. The woman that married Hirohito's grandson. After Hirohito, and then Akihito. After I happened to have been in Tokyo at the time when Hirohito died in 1989, and then his son took over Akihito, and then Akihito finally abdicated, and his son is now on the throne, Naruhito, and his wife, who is born in the mid 60s. She lived in Riverdale. She went to PS 81, which is right around the corner from Riverdale Neighborhood House.
John,
Right.
these
What-
elite Japanese in relationship to the elite of Riverdale, because the Rockefeller family had a main foothold in Japan after the war.
Oh, right.
The Japanese companies were actually controlled by Rockefeller money, and the Rockefellers related to the Dodgers. What interrelationship did you see with them?
They were still,
John, and
hold
also,
on. Don't talk at the same time,
and
guys.
also Utant in relationship possibly to the Delafields and the Dodgers.
Well, you have to understand that there was the Japanese employees. These are just quote unquote corporate employees, and they may be executive managers and things like that. But the bottom line is they were not of the social standing
Right.
of a Utant or any of the the Rockefellers or anybody of that status.
Right, but this is extremely interesting to me because I've always heard of this guy Utant, but I never really related anything. Like I never really thought it through. Wow, the UN had its home for the Secretary General right in Riverdale, literally a stone's throw from the Dodge Mansion, a stone's throw from the Howell Mansion on Palisade Avenue, the same street where all these people live, the Plimptons, the Curlins, all of the elite families of Riverdale. And Eric, you had a conversation with one of, I believe, one of the Plimptons.
Yes.
Who told you about UN and how it was started. Can you just relate briefly to the audience? Because Riverdale seems to be the central hub in this entire global elitist system.
You read my mind, because this is what I was told, John, and I believe it was Mr. Tom Plimpton and not Mr. Richard Lee Stein, whom I also spoke with. But Mr. Plimpton's father, Dr. Calvin Plimpton, took over as a major director of the American University of Beirut, formerly the Scottish Presbyterian Church, that all of these families going back to the 19th century started before Lebanon was separate from Syria. And he told me that practically the initial United Nations, which was really the League of Nations with a changed name, when it started, practically every single person of importance had been a graduate of the American University of Beirut. Now, and that American University of Beirut was chaired by all of these elite members of these elitist families who were centered in Riverdale.
Right. It's unbelievable, the connections here. Now we have the UN, and what's even more fascinating is and John, do you have anything to say about that? Because I have some cool stuff.
It just kind of makes perfect sense to me. I mean, I don't. There's nothing that is in any way kind of out of sync. That makes perfect sense to me. You have, Riverdale, certainly prior to World War II, was an extremely elitist area. And the way anybody who is familiar with the history of the American management of World War II and its immediate aftermath knows that there was a very, sort of the whole OSS, which is the precursor of the CIA, was seen as, you only got a job there if you're name was listed in the New York Social Register.
Very good observation.
It was a very elitist. I mean, that's just how. It was because of FDR was his.
Now,
it came from a very elite background.
To your point, and FDR, of course, the Roosevelts were related by marriage to the Howells as well through a guy named Henry Parrish. So, right. I mean, the connections that we're making here are unbelievable. And I think that all Riverdalians should know about this because it puts a different spin on the history of Riverdale. And also, of course, these people are worldwide players. Now, right. to your point about what you were just saying about all these power players and elitists mingling together, here is, I found this online, and this is an invitation to U Tante's granddaughter's naming ceremony. And it took place Sunday, May 18th, 1969 at Villa Bella Vista, Riverdale. Now, here's some interesting names. Okay, now here, real quick, here are the International Atomic Energy Agency sending a letter to U Tante, the Secretary General of the United Nations, 232nd and Palisade. But here is the lists of people who came to to that party, and I just think people should know some of the names that are on here. Now we have John D. Rockefeller.
Okay, John D. Rockefeller III.
Correct. Right. He's coming to U Tante's place in Riverdale.
Brother JDR3 was the brother of Governor Rockefeller, Nelson Rockefeller.
And here we have another brother, David Rockefeller.
Right.
And then we have this Donald Gabor and Edna Gabor, who I'm not quite sure about.
I wonder if that's the Gabor family of the Gabor sisters who were
you have to understand, Gabor is a very, common Hungarian last name. They may very well have been. I mean, I know that there were a lot of Hungarians that were very, socially prominent, and I don't know if one can.
Right now, the other name,
Raja and Eva's and Magda's family as being of that status.
Right, exactly. Here's some other interesting names that I found, probably more interesting to Eric and the audience who has been watching the Howell stuff than you, John. But still, we have a Kerr.
Yeah.
We have a Kerr hanging out at the UN Secretary General's house, and we've already talked about the Kerr family who are on the board of the Dodges. Now, we don't know whether this is related; these are related, but it probably is. Here's somebody we're going to talk about in a little bit, John. Dr. and Mrs. John Jones of the Riverdale Country School, right? We have
Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan Bingham. He subsequently had, for one or two terms, was the United States Congressman.
Correct. And then Harvey Rosenberg, who was a member of the Roy DeMeo crew. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, actually, there was do you know the Roy DeMeo crew, the Gambino hit squad from out in Brooklyn?
No.
There was I think he called himself Chris Rosenberg, not Harvey Rosenberg, but that was just a little joke I was trying to
Now the Jones is there. Maybe it says John Jones, and he could have been referred to as Calvin Jones, also John Calvin or Calvin Jones.
Right. Well, the thing that I wanted to show the audience real quick about this Jones character is that he starting to complete the circle here. Piser Edelsac, friend and advocate of our neighborhood youth. John Jones is one of the people who was writing about how important it is here for mental health. And I want to talk about this deeply a little bit more when we get to the Horace Mann stuff, and your thoughts on this, John. But I just wanted to show that we are showing that these groups were interconnected. Piser Edelsac through John Jones had a direct line to U Tante. And I'm not saying they knew each other, but I'm saying they hung in the same circles. They were around the same people. And so it's very interesting. Here's another thing that I found interesting just for historians of Riverdale. Mrs. Gabriel Coppell was at U Tante's house. And of course, to anybody who lives in Riverdale, they know that G. Oliver Coppell
yes.
was the the assemblyman, attorney general from Riverdale. Here he is with Dinowitz, who never met a vaccine he didn't love and want to shove into everybody's arms. Here's Elliot Engel, the horrific perennial congressman, and his mustache. And then, of course, here is what's this guy's name again? Do we remember?
I know that face. I can't remember.
Oh, I don't.
He was the attorney general, and he was caught up in a big cocaine. No, not Elliot Spitzer. I forget this guy's name. Somebody in the audience will tell us. But this
by the way, Spitzer grew up in Riverdale.
Oh, he did. Well, he was a sex freak.
But he grew up in Fieldston.
But this guy here was busted.
I know that face.
He was
off the top.
Let me just his official position in New York government.
He was the attorney general, and let me just get out real quick what this guy did, and he admitted to it, and he resigned because of it. He was like getting coked up and beating up his girlfriend and doing all sorts of sick sexual stuff to her and making her do all sorts of sick sexual stuff. So here he is hanging out with Jeffrey Dinowitz, Oliver Coppell, and the mustache himself, Elliot Engel. Right. But this just shows the incestuous nature. This guy is still our assemblyman to this day. And not only that, he's the main person in New York who's pushing for forced vaccinations on everybody. And not only that, he got his son in the city council, who's a complete moron and about the dumbest person I've ever seen. And now he's in city government. It just never ends. And all of these people, again, Coppell, hooked up with, of course, his mother, hooked up with Utante here at this party in 1968. Right. So it just shows that this incestuous political elite relationship in Riverdale goes back since the founding, I would say, of Riverdale.
And what is factually sick, I didn't know that about this ex-attorney general of ours here in New York, is that all three of them undeniably knew what he was doing and did not care.
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt.
That's a whole library of information. There's so much that you could just talk about that particular issue for a year without even slightly
exactly. All right.
What year is this, Manny? Just quickly. What year?
I would say that this picture was taken in the 90s sometime because it looks it just from the suits and from how young Dinowitz looks here. Now, I remember Dinowitz, just for full disclosure. My father and I couldn't be more far apart politically. He is unfortunately a very establishment Democrat. He worked for Coppell as an aide in the late 70s. He didn't last very long. He didn't stay very long. But I remember driving around in a van with this freak here, Dinowitz. He had a big afro in those years. And even as a 4 or 5 year old, 6 year old in the van, I knew this guy was off.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I knew something was off with him, and I never wanted to be around this guy. So anyway, very interesting backstory, very interesting history. And of course, I think we should be
just to everybody to get a little bit of a very dark chuckle. After Utante, his term of office at the United Nations was completed, he was replaced by Kurt Waldheim from Austria, who had made quite a notice in the world about how he was, Mr. Peace and Justice and all that in the post-World War II world. Well, and but then they forgot to mention what he was doing during World War II. Wink, wink.
Yeah, it was a freaking Nazi.
Say no more. And then when it was announced that he would not be moving into, because everybody in the neighborhood thought that, well, when Utante leaves, the next guy, because officially Villa Bella Vista was quote unquote the official residence of the Secretary General of the United Nations. So whoever gets the job next moves in. But he was like, no, I'm not moving there. And
Waldheim knew what was up.
Yeah, people were like, he was afraid of running into some people he knew from the old country.
The old days.
Because there's another side to the story that he was, in Austria during National Socialism, but there's another side to the story that he was being framed and they were trying to make him some type of a war criminal, which he wasn't. I remember that story very well. It was in 1987 it took place.
I don't know either way. It's something that I just never
put it this way. I don't know either way, but I know there in the 70s when Utant left. See, this is then what happened when Waldheim chose not to move into Villa Bella Vista. The house just kind of, first they had some kind of, groundskeepers, some kind of, estate manager there, but that just kind of evaporated.
It fell into ruin. In fact, look at this. Is what I found very interesting in the Riverdale Press from 1968. Here you have in what are now the Riverdale Woods, where I go walking almost every day, and where it is so sylvan and beautiful. Here you have an abandoned car with broken glass.
Wow.
Who knows where this car came from, and it's looking up towards Villa Bella Vista, and it's part of a larger article. Park along the Hudson is a disgrace, and it just shows the Riverdale Woods like not even wooded and filled with like garbage.
You have to understand there was a just about there in the late 60s there was a the initiation and development of what's called the Green Belt, and that area from Palisade Avenue down to the railroad tracks was officially designated as a green space that would not be used for any kind of further development. It would be, kind of a conservation area. And they did actually put in, there was some additional, water management, waste management.
Yeah, we were talking about that in our first episode. The elites, actually, the Curlins, the Plimptons, the Howells of the world, all who lived there, created what's called the Special Natural Areas District,
right.
Which the Green Zone, which prevented all sorts of development. In a way, good. So I'm not going to say anything bad. But listen, we are here. This was an awesome history, and we can talk forever. But we are here to talk about something.
Let's go back to the dome. Okay.
Let's take it back to the dome.
Historical perspective on this. Luck of the draw. The summer of 1972, I happened to be working at Neighborhood House as a junior counselor at their day camp. And that's where I first had any contact with, and even it was just so minor, with Piser Edelsac. I just, he was somebody who worked in the building, and that was, the extent of my contact with him. And then, so after the summer of 72, beginning in, I guess it was the beginning of September of 72, was when this whole dome project got underway. So because I had just been at, Neighborhood House, I kind of, there's going to be this thing, just down the block from my house. And so that's why I kind of got interested in and became kind of in his a very
So you got into you became introduced to this whole dome milieu. Okay, now
from the very beginning.
Yes.
So you were an original dome person.
Right.
You were 18 years of age?
No, I was 13 years old.
Oh, I thought
13.
You were born in 54. Okay.
Okay, now, so So the questions that I have are of course are many, and I want to kind of guide this discussion along. So we keep it within a certain time frame here. So you are part of this initial Dome people group. Now, how many people would you say that were involved with this initial Dome group?
Well, put it this way, I can't say I was in no way could I be described as official. At that point, it was just, the kids in the neighborhood showed up to just look at what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And, the quote unquote people in charge, like Tommy Martin, were sort of extended their hand to say, hey, we want to welcome you here, and we would encourage you and hope you'll help us do some work, because this is what we want this place to be. It's going to be the Dome, literally physically as much as possible, built by the kids in the neighborhood. And that
now,
was
but you
quote unquote purpose of the Dome.
But you weren't part of this crew of people that hung out on Johnson Avenue or the Monument, taking heroin, smoking reefer.
No, they were a little bit older than me, but I'm a little bit. I know there was all of that, hysteria about the Johnson Avenue crowd. Later, when I was like in 8th and 9th grade, I did some of that. I was quote unquote hanging out on Johnson Avenue also.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just, I know it was for quote unquote the adults in the neighborhood like to, squeeze their hands and get very upset and think that this is it. It was, a bunch of teenagers hanging out.
Right.
They thought that when you're 15, you think you're cool because you can, be out at 10 o'clock at night.
Right.
I
So
think that Tom Martin was a very kind, welcoming person.
Oh yes, very much so. Very much so.
That's what I thought.
all right. So a part of this original, what I'm calling the OGDPs, the original gangster Dome people, the original Dome people, okay, which I'm considering you part of since you were there right from the start and helped build it. What was the sociological makeup? What was the ethnic, religious makeup of this initial group of people?
It was sort of at that point, there was the kids from the west side is sort of pretty well recognized. There has long been this social divide in Riverdale.
West of the Parkway versus east of the Parkway.
Correct.
Right.
And
hold on, let me just clarify for the audience. West of the Parkway being where Seton Park was, that was more exclusive. Palisade Avenue was west of the Parkway. Even to this day, John's correct. And then east of the Parkway takes you down towards Greystone and Broadway, Riverdale Avenue, Johnson Avenue. So it's a little less hoity-toity.
Right. And so the kids that just sort of saw from literally day one, that we're at the playground at PS 24, up the hill, up the street at 141, were more the west side of.
Right. So back to the Dome. Would you say the kids were predominantly Jewish and middle to upper class, or was that?
And then plus saying there was the other kind of, if you want to look at this as the social superstructure of Riverdale,
definitely,
because of Riverdale Neighborhood House being up at 254th Street and Marshall Avenue, there was the Northerners.
Right.
They were really much more, quote unquote, the official people, because they had a much longer standing and much more serious connection with the whole operation,
with Piser and the neighborhood house. Actually, that That
So
brings me.
they quote unquote came down, and they're there, and we being the kids from right around 141 in that area,
Right.
So they brought them together. The kids at that point from east of the Parkway were just not even there.
So actually, you know what? You're backed up in when what you're saying. So what you're saying was kind of clicky. The North Riverdale kids, the maybe separated out, by socioeconomic background. Are you saying that they became clicky?
Oh yeah. Well,
So, because what you're saying is backed up by a letter to the editor that I read in the Riverdale Press. This was when the Dome was failing way after Piser had left, and I want to read this. I want to read this because everyone says, "Oh, the Dome was this great thing. It brought everybody together, and everybody loved it and had the greatest of experiences." And we are, to be fair, finding so far have spoken to people with nothing but great experiences. But interestingly, the people who we've spoken to were Shell wasn't very wasn't at that top socioeconomic background, and she was from South Riverdale. But quite a few people that we did speak to were from that sort of Riverdale neighborhood house, upper class milieu. And this is a letter I found interesting, so I'll just read it, and maybe you can comment on it. I would like to comment on your January 27th editorial, which urges that the Seton Park Dome be saved. I think that you have been misled by the neighborhood house statement that, quote, economic realities, quote, are the reasons for the decision to abandon the dome. The facts as I knew them are as follows. Now, this is the important thing that I'm saying here. Even when the Dome first opened, it was dominated by a clique of youths who discouraged outsiders and who used the Dome as a private clubhouse both day and night until management changed the locks amid outcries from the ensconced revelers. So this implies to me that the first group of the Dome people, not only did they click out, right? They went into their own groups and didn't like outsiders, but also it was almost like a cultic thing.
Well, I mean, but that's, come on, you're talking about teenagers, and this is teenage sociology 101. I mean, it you can find this in any place in the United States. Is always going to be these little cliques of everybody's. They've done a million movies about the Mean Girls and the this, that, and so that's I mean, I don't consider that to be all that significant. It's just kind of...
It does bring out something significant, that article, though. What year was that about, Manny, more or less?
This was probably about 76, 75, 76.
Okay, and the Dome just ended about 75, right?
Well, that's what I'm still trying to figure out, because you have this initial group of ideologues, of idealists led by Piser, and then all of a sudden Piser leaves, and as we know from his wife, and he couldn't have cared less. He just left and just left it and didn't even look back. And then the place kind of falls into, like, it becomes like they give programs there for a year or two. And then from what I heard in the neighborhood, it just fell into total disarray, abandoned, drug addicts everywhere, nodding out.
More than one person.
I'm sorry?
We've heard that from more than one person.
Correct.
But this is what's very strange about that. Was that an anonymous letter?
Yes.
Okay.
Name withheld.
That's in the Riverdale Press. This
Correct.
Is very strange. They're lamenting the failure of the Dome, right? It should have continued and so forth and so on. Here we have, I don't know if you have the slide, Manny. If not, I can.
I do. I have it right here.
There it is. Yes, this we did. This was from a former show. And here I'll read this again. It's short. 1971, December 9th. This contradicts what's written in the Riverdale Press afterwards and what I've been told. This structure will be used as a community center for Southern Riverdale until it is no longer needed.
Well, it says here temporary up here.
Yeah. Right. Or until the Department of Parks wants the land for another purpose. At the present time, no such facility exists in this area. I find
Right.
that quite paradoxical. Already in 1971, and that was told to me by Piser's wife, a lovely woman, Susan Edelsac Cole, when I said, what did Piser feel like? And the answer she gave, John, was he wasn't emotionally hurt or intellectually or psychologically. He just went on to something else. This is what perplexed me. This paradox. You're supposed to be so much for this. Speeches are being made. And
Hold on, guys. Don't talk over each other.
Please, John, let me finish. But then, years before, in 1971, 2 years before a year before they started to build it, all the way up to 76, it was already foreseen it would not last forever. This means that Piser Edelsac knew that, and his wife has confirmed this for me. Different is the story of Richard Lee Stein, that the elites lost interest and no longer was their support. That could also be a factor.
But also, and then John, you can answer. To me, it seemed like you guys were being told that this was your space. It was going to be yours forever. This was yours to have forever. Were you guys?
There's a very fine line you're walking on that. It was marketed as, it's just going to be this like cool place, and they'll have plays, and local bands can play there, and it's you can have all these artsy fartsy kinds of things there, and they did have. I mean, I very clearly remember a food co-op used the place at one time, and you come and you buy all these organic vegetables when back in the days when, of course, you couldn't get anything organic in a supermarket.
Right.
But it was no one ever said this was going to be forever. But they made no effort to dissuade you from thinking that way.
Right.
You understand? This is what I'm pointing out, the fine line.
Okay.
It was kind of sold as, it's a wonderful place, and you can do this and that and the other thing, and but no one, they kind of brushed over, and nobody really discussed or kind of clarified the long-term status of the building and what the whole
right. And what you're saying here is somewhat backed up by the second part of that letter we read before. The Dome was never popular with any age group in the community, in spite of large attendance at special youth programs for a period of time. Furthermore, a youth whose vandalism a renewed Dome is supposed to prevent told me that the attempt to draw in Johnson Avenue people failed miserably. And the Dome, like Seton Park itself, is most vulnerable to vandalism. There were numerous break-ins during its history. So I don't know. I don't know. You were there. So
you have to understand also these subsets within subsets.
Exactly.
I think there was, even if you want to focus on the Johnson Avenue crowd for a while, there was the difference between the kids that literally hung out in the area of the stores between 235th and 236th, and then there was the crowd that hung out down by Ewan Park, and I was never in any way, shape, or form affiliated or associated with that crowd, but I heard gossip, how legitimate it was or not. It was always kind of, I'll just kind of stay away from there.
So let's take it back to the Dome then. So tell us about your experiences building the Dome. What was that like? Were you embraced by this?
This picture that you've got up is
Tom Martin.
Exactly how I remember it. I mean, I could have been standing, 3 feet away when this picture was taken. I think that guy right underneath Tommy. I'm guessing that that's Richie Sherrill. I'm not sure from the back. All I'm sort of focusing on is the long hair and everything.
Right.
That's who I think that is. This guy, I can't remember his name. I mean, this is
We were told this is Mark Barron.
Yeah, I think that is Mark Barron. Now that you mention it, so the point being that this is literally how I remember. As I say, I could have literally been 3 feet away when this picture was taken.
So talk to us about how you, as a 13-year-old, Irish kid. Now, you weren't a poor kid. You were from the neighborhood. But your parents were both lawyers. But you weren't part of this core group of Riverdale Neighborhood House Dome people. How were you personally treated at the Dome?
Fine. I didn't have. I mean, because I had my sort of social bona fides, if you want to use that fancier term, was the kids knew me from the neighborhood. They knew I was, I lived on Hudson Manor Terrace, and I was kind of from, and I had literally lived there my entire life. Right. So I wasn't just, I didn't show up from out of nowhere.
Because we had a woman, another Irish lady from the neighborhood. We'll let her tell the story with her name. We won't give her name now, but she said that she was treated horribly by the.
I'm not surprised. I mean,
why? Wait. Why aren't you surprised?
Well, because this is, because the quote unquote, wonderful liberals of, liberal Democrats of Riverdale. I mean, I knew from, I always knew that I had to, kind of show my, that I wasn't like, quote unquote, those other people over on the other side. The race, classism and, ethnicism, was so rigid. I mean, because I could, quote unquote, pass. So I understand. And there were a few, black kids in the neighborhood. There was a very wealthy black family, the Joneses. That's a whole other can of fish. But there were a few other, reasonably well-to-do professional, what I would call professional class families who happened to be black, that were, it was kind of like, you're okay because, we know you, but, it's, we don't like people that aren't, part of our class. And so I could, pass because, they, people knew that my parents took me to Europe on vacation. And
right. And, Riverdale's the same way to this day, not so much economically, but along political lines. If you dare to have any belief that's contrary to what you said, the liberal Democrat, I call them pseudo progressives because I consider myself a real progressive. Right. Those people I consider very fascistic and backwards and retrograde. But if you dare have a different opinion, you're done. You're done for in this neighborhood. You're canceled. Your job is gone. Your social, everything is gone. So I'm just wondering whether those things were existing back then.
Of course.
So all right. So we could speak about these all day long, these social structures, but what we want to find out is just more about this guy Piser. Now, so far we've spoken to quite a few people, and we've gotten a lot of feedback, a lot of thoughts on Piser and who he was. And so far, we've had people say he deserves a Nobel Prize. He was a wizard. This guy was the greatest gift since sliced bread, and so on and so forth. But as I always say to the audience, you can't have darkness without light. You can't have sickness without health, and you can't have good without bad. So I know that is not that picture we were getting of Piser was simply one dimensional. I had to know that there was other perspectives out there. And so when we spoke to you, you had an interesting take on Piser, and why don't you just why don't you just get into it?
I think, and ironically, I can't swear to the actual timeline, but my best guess is that it was probably right around this time of 1973. So we're talking about like spot on 50 years ago. Jesus Christ. The dome had been, the dome never was quote unquote completed, but it was at least functionally operational. And there was I don't know what there was supposed to be some kind of big meeting to talk about, what's going to be in the spring and the summer. And, we're going to talk about to let people know what kind of plans are and how to, talking about what the future of the next, 6 months of the dome is going to be. And it was, I believe, again, I could be wrong. I think it was a Sunday night, but I could be wrong. But I remember the night very well. There must have been at least 30 or between 30 and 40 people in the dome.
Now, when you say people, when you say people, what age groups are we talking about? Who was there?
I would say 4/5 of that were, under 18.
Okay.
And there was the few quote unquote, official people like Piser, who this is the story of my run-in with him. So we're sitting there, and if anybody remembers the structure, it was basically if you walk in there, it's a circle, and there was a kind of cutout area where it was supposed to be a bathroom that never got put in, and there was some other office area that never got operational, and then there was this little loft area. Anyway, so people were sitting towards the back, which is the front of the building where you walk in. Yeah, like there. See, that was like where that person is. Anyway, so everybody's sitting there, and we're about to this quote unquote meeting about to, get started to discuss all of these things. And whoever I was sitting next to, remember we're, at most 14 years old at this point, happened to be said something that I thought was funny. I laughed or kind of, made some kind of a comment. And all of a sudden, Piser just fucking freaks out on me. Who are you over there? And said, come over here. Stand here. And this like freaked out on me and made me stand in front of everybody. And he went into this whole rant about how, why didn't I believe in the,
Whoops, hold on. I'm sorry, John. I cut you off. Why didn't you believe in the what?
Believe in the what's the mission of the dome and all, and it was like this was complete, for a an adult man. I mean, I don't know how old he was at this point, but
How old were you?
I was 14 at most, and he was at least 30, if not more. And I mean, for whatever faux pas I may have, because I was chit-chatting with whoever was sitting next to me, at most he, the appropriate thing would have just been to say, please, we're trying to have a meeting here. Please,
or something like
yeah. Shush. And but to just turn, and literally, sort of publicly shame me, and make me, this like example of this is, this kind of, scarlet letter. You are, how fucking dare you, not be completely absorbed in everything that I'm talking about.
So it sounds like a cult leader, and you weren't part of it.
And
right.
Exactly. He's supposed to be a community youth worker, a
Correct.
street worker. And he
Correct.
talked that to you. Did he say to you, did he ever say what was the mission? Did he ever personally explain verbally?
No. This was literally after this, and then in this very official, now sit down, this very, administrative kind of, you will do what I tell you to do. And instead of sitting down, I was so embarrassed, I literally walked out of the dome and I left. And after that, the few other times I ever saw Piser, I made a point of like walking in the other direction. I did not want to have any kind of interaction, good, bad, or anything else with this guy.
I mean, that sounds horrible to do. Eric, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, man.
My feeling was like, who would do that to, if you're an adult, and you don't treat a teenager that way.
John, what year was that? And did you return to the dome after?
As I say, I believe this was like late winter of 1973. And because I knew that, Piser's presence at the dome was sporadic at best. So, my feeling was, as long as he wasn't there, I didn't have a problem. And
we have two different stories on that.
Excuse me?
I just want to confirm with you. Ashel told us he was there to supervise. Every now and then he would show up, right, Manny?
Yeah, and that's
and
that's what John just said.
Right, and Tom Martin told me that he was always there. I spoke with him on the telephone. He says, no, Piser was really present there.
But maybe Tom was just talking. Maybe Tom was just talking about the construction phase. I mean, right. He's in the chat, so I think he's in the chat. So maybe he'll chime in. So do you feel? I mean, this is just. Did he have any outbursts like this to any other people before?
I have no idea. I just was very I was very shocked that happened. No, Pies. Well, look, as a 13 and 14-year-old, I would have been there only after school.
Right.
Now, what happened between, 8 a.m. and 3 p.m., I can,
right.
actually tell you I wasn't there at that time. So you could say, was he there on, March 5th? and I would say, well, I was there on March 15th and I didn't see him. And somebody else can say, I was there on March 15th and I
Well,
was
we're
talking.
getting that. We're getting that right now, John. Look, we have Ishell, right?
She's corrected us. It wasn't her who said that.
His presence was not sporadic. He was always there. But then Tom Martin says here, and they're both live in the chat, he was just there for construction. So this is why we're doing this, everyone out there. See, like, people, the Riverdale establishment thinks that they own the story of the dome, right? People like Richie Stein, he owns the dome. He owns the story. Sorry, you don't own this story. This story is made up of many, many individuals, all with their own individual remembrances. As we're seeing here, we're getting a different perspective from Piser. And we're also getting, of course, all these different remembrances from people who were there as well. So that I think that's neither here nor there. I want to explore this outburst a little bit more, because it's indicative of someone who is, in my opinion, I'm just giving my opinion, ready to blow at any moment, on edge, ready to strike out like a cobra, right? And do you feel like he had his eyes on you before this? Had you ever had any run-ins with him?
Certainly not to that, like that. I kind of, again, this is sensations that, are, the old New York City joke, that and a token get you on the subway.
Right.
My sensation was that for whatever reason, I was not, sort of favored. I was not on his,
Do you have any speculation as to why? Do you feel it was religiously based, ethnically based, socioeconomically class based? Because you were wealthy, he was.
I have no idea. I really, you just kind of know there are certain people that you
just don't vibe with.
Right.
So now Tom is taking us to task, and that's fine. We expect it, and we want this to happen. So John fucked up and got yelled at. Grow up. So what do you say to Tom with this?
Well, I mean, the thing is, as an adult now, I would never talk to, a younger, still child. As an adult, you kind of think of anybody under 18 as kind of, a child, and address them, and you give them sort of some leeway because of their younger age.
Right. Like at most, all I would have done was like, "Hey guys, come on, we're everybody, we're here." Like that's all I would have done.
Yes, that's exactly right.
But it sounds like you were publicly shamed and brought up in front of.
It's very exaggerated.
What?
It was exaggerated to have you stand up.
I mean, it was this intentional humiliation.
It's very interesting that he would do that publicly. And then, of course, it just makes me wonder what was going on privately. Now, I'm not asking you to speculate, and I'm not speculating. But we have a story now on record, not told by me and not told by Eric, but told by the guy, John, who experienced it within the dome.
There must have been 30 or 40 people. This is not something that, you probably misunderstood, or, this kind of, how can we dismiss this as
right? Like Tom is trying to dismiss you now.
Or recollection. No, I mean, the only reason I am speaking out like this today is because it did happen in front of 30 to 40 people. This was not something that was, some kind of I misunderstood or kind of,
right.
This is a clear-cut thing that happened in front of many, many people.
I've got to say this. There is a hint that this would take place. In the New York Times article that you have, Manny, by Mr. John L. Hess from the 19th of December, 1972.
I'll get it while you're talking.
Okay. John Hess is interviewing Mr. Edelsac, Piser, and Piser, he says, grumbles about not liking all the people that showed up and that he has a preference for fewer people. And yet I question, but isn't a big turnout positive for what that dome was supposed to be, to take people away from Johnson Avenue who had nothing but narcotics and a waste of time?
Here we go. Here it is. Looking on with suppressed pride was red-bearded Piser Edelsac, who, when complimented on the turnout, grumbled, "I'd prefer to work with fewer people. I'm not into mass numbers at all." I mean, I don't know how that relates to John's story.
Well, to prefer to work with fewer people, if you're a community worker, you're dealing with a community which has a vast number of people, a vast number of youth. And I mean, I would never say I prefer to work with fewer people. He's actually giving a negative opinion about what's taking place at the Dome.
You're right, actually. He's basically saying, I don't want to work around all these people.
To a prominent, I looked up John L. Hess. He was a prominent, respected New York Times journalist. So I find that awfully strange.
And also, I don't want to dismiss John's feelings and emotions. As Corky says here, it's trauma. In the context of the Dome story, he never forgot it. And of course, our friend Dom,
I would say that's a very accurate summation.
It clearly right. And Dom DeLipso says it clearly still affects John today. It was obviously a big deal. He never forgot it. So I don't think we can be so flippant as what Tom said as to get over it, because this is something that when we spoke to you about it on the phone, your emotions were huge. And it's clear from talking about it now that this was a very intensely humiliating experience for you that you never forgot.
Right.
That happened to me all my life in parochial school and high school. I know how you feel. I was always singled out, and believe me, I don't have a complex.
So now before this happened, did you have any impressions of Piser, like just looking at him as a human being? Now, before this happened.
Before this, I mean, I just, I don't know. I just didn't, my feeling was like, well, I always thought the name was kind of weird. Like, what's a pipe? It wasn't like Steve Rosenberg or something normal like that.
It's German.
What?
It's German.
Is it? Oh, yeah. Okay.
A German form, a German form of paper, which is Peter.
So I didn't know, and I just got the vibe that this was somebody who was very full of himself. That you just I mean, run into people like that my entire life, and I generally try to stay away from them. Just because I know that they're. My experience is that unless they feel they're getting something out of you, they don't want to, they wouldn't quote unquote waste their time being nice to you unless there's, a very specific, something that they could get out of the deal.
Right. What did the kids do when this happened? What was going on amongst the kids?
I think everybody was just so, that's the thing. Everybody was quiet because they were kind of shocked and stunned. And I think that for most of the kids, as I said, everybody was, at least 4/5 were under 18. And I would say that at least 50% were well under, 15. I mean, there were more 13, 14, and 15-year-olds.
Right.
Than there were, 16, 17, and 18-year-olds.
Right.
And I think, and which I think is a very, legitimate response for a kid of that age to like, hey, if the guns are blazing, I don't want to.
Right. They're just shell shocked. They don't know what to do.
Right.
It was very similar. I had a teacher in third grade named Mrs. Greif in PS24. She was subsequently murdered by her husband, but she was a horrific witch, and she would hit the kids in class. And I remember there was one particular kid, Rogelio, who she would always single out and literally beat up in front of all of us. And we didn't know what to do. We were just like, this was third grade. We had no clue. And well, she ended up getting hers, but I want to talk about this Piser incident even more. How close were you? Could you feel his breath on you? Did he touch you? Did it get physical?
No, he was sitting. There was like a row of kids, sitting on the floor between me and him.
Uh-huh.
So I literally, I could not be, I would have, if I were to quote unquote shake his hand, I would have to significantly lean forward, as would he.
So you weren't close when he wasn't close to you doing this or touching you or getting in your face.
I was directly in front of him. He told me to get up from where I was sitting on the other side of the room. He said, "Come over here." So I got up, and what bothers me to this day is why I didn't tell him right then and there to go fuck himself. How could you talk to me like this?
Well, here's your chance at a little catharsis. I mean, people, you're getting your story out. I mean, this is something clearly that's been bothering you. Or, I mean, I wouldn't say that this defined your life. I don't think you would say that either. But it's something that definitely stuck with you. I mean, this was huge.
Right, and he said, stand there, meaning right as much as possible in front of him, and then he goes on this rant, and then when he finishes, he's telling me to go sit down, and I was so humiliated.
Right.
I didn't want to be there, and that's I just literally left the building.
Right.
That was.
But Eric, this is directed more towards you. What's striking to me about John's recollection of this is one of the things that Piser hinted at and intimated, which was, you don't believe in our mission. This gets to the whole cultic nature, I think, of Piser and the personality cult that surrounded Piser.
And the possibility that this was an experimental project, and there were people with Piser, but of a lower tier, who did not know perhaps what the sub-intention really was of this place.
I mean, there was a mission.
And by the way, also, let me just add one last point. Of course, nobody else, and I'm not even talking about the 13 and 14-year-olds, I'm talking about the other adults in the room. Nobody said, "Hey, Piser, enough already. This is a little much for a kid that was,
14 years old." Yeah. Was he drugged up or high or drunk at this?
How I would have no idea.
Book Club Warrior is asking here. So what did John say that set Piser off? You just laughed at a joke, right?
Yeah, somebody sitting next to me said something to me, and I giggled, and instead of and because I was laughing, that this completely set him off.
Did he say, did John, so Book Club's asking, did John say something against the mission?
No, I was just, the only thing that he would have heard being expressed was just laughter.
Now, actually, do you remember what was exactly being spoken about? Because maybe he thought you were laughing at what he was saying.
Well, maybe but
like 50 years.
It's literally 50 years. B, when you're an adult over 30 years old, when there's someone less than half your age, no matter what silliness they may have said or done, you just at most tell them to please be quiet,
right.
Just we're trying to conduct business here, you know.
So we're getting a more rounded picture of Piser. Okay, Lisa Rifkin, he was a wizard. He deserved Nobel prizes. Ishell, we love Ishell. She's in the chat, and she had nothing but the greatest things to say about Piser. Mark Barron, Piser took him to the elitist's house where alone, I believe, where he was trying to get financing for the dome. So everything seemed hunky dory there. But you're giving us now a more holistic view of the man, and to me, it sounds like he was a major control freak.
Yeah, and what? Yeah, I mean that's the thing. And why didn't I see someone makes a legitimate comment here. Moet Alvarez says, right, maybe Piser thought he was laughing at him.
Even if true, so what? He's 30. You're a 14-year-old kid.
Right, exactly.
That was also the tail end of a period where teachers in public schools, parochial schools, any type of religious schools or secular, would hit students, would humiliate students, even to the point where a child might end up doing pee-pee or poo-poo in his trousers because they would not permit him to go to the bathroom. These things were taking place. I saw it take place. They could hit them, and you had to respect being hit by them because they represented your parents disciplining you.
So this story, while not, a major story about being physically abused or sexually abused, still, to me, though, this is a disturbing story because, one, he had no real authority over you. You weren't his student. You weren't you weren't in his charge. You weren't there for any other reason than for voluntary reasons.
Exactly.
And here he is humiliating you in front of all of your peers.
Correct.
In a vicious manner, right in your face. And then discouraging you to the point where you left and didn't even want to really participate much in this anymore. To me, that's not really the sign of a great youth worker or social worker or community worker. And of course, we have here getting into our next topic. Do you have anything to complete on this before we get into this John Jones Riverdale Country School?
Well, just the only thing is that I mean, many years later, thinking about this, I just was like, I know there were other quote unquote adults there, and nobody, this is the thing, nobody said, hey, Piser, let's move along, try to, if you see an adult acting inappropriately, you as another adult. If I was, quote unquote, a third adult in that situation, I would have said, okay, fine. We have so many things on the agenda tonight. Let's, just to kind of disconnect the whole, the situation and disconnect any of the conflict.
So Captain Obvious says here, what did Piser do as a career after the Dome? He went and started one of these charter schools on Fordham Road in the Bronx, one of these experimental charter schools. So he was always he went from being around kids at the Dome and to being around kids at a charter school. So that's what he did. I mean, I don't know what he did after that exactly.
And he also taught at the junior high school 141 certain classes of young students together with Gus Andreatis and Tom Martin.
Correct. And we still have to find out more about those classes because they were ended because Tom was talking about sex and drugs and
the children were.
Oh, right. The children. And yeah. So we have to.
And we don't know about Gus. Piser didn't want to discuss that. And Tom said, I'll discuss it with you. Nothing bad about Tom and wanting to do that. He wanted to help them. But Piser wrote a letter saying to Mr. Kaufman, the principal, these 8 children will no longer be present.
So let's move on. So all right. So we got a different view of Piser here, and I personally am very happy that we have that because again, darkness and light, good and bad, sickness, health. You
Matt,
have to.
quick question.
Yeah.
please, aside from the liberal, progressive Democrats within the Dome, was there anything specifically ideological, politically spoken about or hinted at?
Not that I really, there was, there may have been, and I could easily be wrong here, some kind of, sort of, standard early 1970s kind of, counterculture posters, things like that, were so widespread and were so ubiquitous all over the place.
But there weren't equal posters for Richard Nixon's reelection.
Of course not.
Okay, all right. That's kind of what we wanted to get here, because we're reading all sorts of Maoist thought in the Undercurrents newsletter of the Dome, and so we're just, again, as I told Tom Martin in a private message, we're looking at this from 50,000 feet. We're looking at this as sociologists and as cultural anthropologists. We're not looking at this to be hagiographers of Piser Edelsac and to jerk Richie Stein off as he's so used to being done in the last 50 years in Riverdale. My attitude is I don't owe these people anything, so I'm going to be looking at this fairly. And so this story to me is, it's not as horrifying to me as a story of sexual abuse, but to me it's a very, very interesting insight into the man, especially considering that everybody who we've spoken to thought of him as a god. And I'm just wondering whether now we're seeing this whole cultic. Now, I'm not using that term like a satanic cult or people sacrificing in the woods. I'm talking about the pure classical definition of a cult, like a leader and his followers. And it seems like Piser was it. This is just my opinion. Piser was a cult leader. He had his minions among the Dome people. And if you weren't part of it, you were treated like John was. Again, you can comment on that and take me to task however way you want. John?
I mean, I think that's, I mean, I sort of never made any effort to kind of give him any adulation. So maybe it was, it's not what I said, it was as much as what I didn't say.
Right. So here we have, moving on to our next topic, which will be our last topic. And I don't want to spend a million years on this. I kind of just want to touch on this. So you wrote me an email because you saw in this thing here, Piser Edelsac, friend and advocate of our neighborhood youth. And this was part of that article we talking about the quiet revolution in mental health.
Right.
There was a quote here from John Jones, headmaster of Riverdale Country School, who we already saw partied at Uton's house. So he was hanging out with the UN delegation. Right. And here he is. We don't know whether he knew Piser Edelsac, but here he is on a piece of paper where it's talking about Piser Edelsac, and he has a blurb here. And I'll just read it real quick. And then, John, please tell us why you thought this was somewhat interesting. And then we'll get into the last topic of today, which is Horace Mann. So in today's world, we need community mental health facilities more and more. Within the educational institutions, especially, we are discovering that students whom we did not think had problems are really in need of help. We have come to realize the importance of getting at things early. So why did you contact me about this specifically?
I have a very clear-cut statement on that. As many people know, back in 2010, there was that very shocking New York Times Magazine article written by Amos Camille.
Here it is. Prep school predators.
Right. I've known since the kid was 5 years old, about what was going on at Horace Mann in the late 1960s and early 1970s.
Now, just so everyone knows, Horace Mann is one of 3 very exclusive private schools located in Riverdale. particularly in the Fieldston section of Riverdale. The first one is Ethical Culture Fieldston School. The
Right.
second is Riverdale Country School, of which John Jones was the headmaster. And the
Right.
third is Horace Mann School. Okay, carry on.
Now, this again, to go back to Amos's article, and it became a huge scandal all over New York. I knew I had many friends. My older brother had friends that went to Horace Mann. They were the kids in the neighborhood, And I will not name any names because I don't want to bring any kind. I know some of these people have literally died. I don't know, whether it was what caused the deaths, but the bottom line is there were these kids that Horace Mann at the time was all boys. Had were these exemplary young men that were just absolutely stellar, the very model of, the all-American successful young men that have, extremely bright futures ahead of them. That then by the time they were in their early 20s, just literally disintegrated. They went from being Ivy League students to just kind of, decided to, hook up with Hare Krishna for a while and then kind of do other less directed,
Right.
be less directed than being in the Hare Krishna.
So you think that these kids might have been part of this whole scandal of abuse?
Well, yeah. I mean, because it clearly everything that was publicly written in the New York Times.
Right. Now, what's interesting is that Tom,
exactly who was
right,
being, what happened to these, and all of a sudden, so from mid 1970s, seeing these guys that just kind of, as I use the word, evaporated. They just kind of went from being, very dynamic. One went to Harvard, and there was this real top-notch guys that looked like they just stepped out of a Ralph Lauren ad, and they just became nothing.
Right. Now, what's interesting is that once you told us about this, and I knew about the Horace Mann scandal, but of course now we're actually speaking to people who we think might have who we know have direct experience with this. We also then spoke to Tom Martin, who was your construction manager at the Dome.
Right.
Now, Tom went to Barnard School for Boys, and he talks about this. He talks about this in our video. Now, Eric and I had a conversation with Tom by telephone about a week ago now, maybe a little less. And if Tom's in the chat, he'll remember this. We asked him about this, does he remember anything happening? Because Barnard School for Boys merged with Horace Mann.
Correct.
Right. So Tom was very unequivocal. Eric, tell us what Tom told us.
Well, I mentioned Horace Mann, and of course the Barnard School for Boys merged with Horace Mann as one school in 1972. And I asked him, did you ever know of anyone being sexually abused at Barnard School for Boys? And he said, oh, yes, it happened.
He said it was common knowledge. Everybody just knew about it.
There was I think he even said there was a homosexual group of teachers, but they were pederasts. They would maybe forced to perform fellatio and who knows what else on these young men. And it was all covered up. Everybody knew. And when they found out the teacher was guilty, just like with the church or religious groups, they transfer him to another educational institution.
Right. And Tom told us straight up. He said, well, it never happened to me, but it happened to someone I knew very well. Definitely. So, maybe Tom maybe this will be a little tangent off the Dome. Now, we're not saying that the Dome was related.
Now, all right, but wait, I have one last little point to make.
Yeah.
My question, and this is just my question, okay? Because it was so well documented what was going on at Horace Mann, and it was so widespread amongst the faculty and the Horace Mann headmaster in those days very, very much was involved in all of this, and Amos clearly documented that, so that's not even
right. The headmaster knew. They all knew.
He not only knew, he was involved in it. But
what's the headmaster's name?
Clark, Inslee Clark, something like that. I can't just remember right off the top of my head. His last name was definitely Clark.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, my question is, did the headmaster of Riverdale Country School have any awareness of what was going on? Did he make this comment about this sort of need for psychological services? Did that come from his awareness of what was going on over at Horace Mann?
Right, and of course, when we, as coming from the true crime conspiracy world, from the Son of Sam world, where we were dealing with issues of child trafficking and elite pedophile networks, well, this is a very interesting story, because we're finding now that these elitists in Riverdale were all connected with one another. I mean, without a doubt. Now we don't know for sure that Alfred Hunt Howell knew the head of Horace Mann, who knew the head of Riverdale Country School, who knew. We're not making those connections. But what we are saying is that this article here brings up some very interesting subjects, or whatever, issues that I think we should address. So real quick, I want to just read this. He wasn't safe at school, and the church offered him even less sanctuary. A Horace Mann alum who claims he was sexually abused as a student by multiple school staffers now says his nightmare extended to 2 local churches, where a priest and a trio of monks raped and whipped him. John Seeger, 57, was a young teen when his music teacher, identified only as the maestro, brought him to the Church of St. Ignatius Loyola in Manhattan and forced him to join the choir. He said he was left in the hands of a Jesuit priest, Father Charles Hoffner, who raped and assaulted him at least 30 times over the course of 2 years. Now, we're not done. The twisted cleric would compel the 14-year-old to confess his masturbatory habits, then regularly abused him under the pretext of providing guidance, and so on and so forth.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt. What's the date on when was this article published?
April 13th, 2019.
2019, okay.
Okay, now what's interesting for us is so now we're talking about Horace Mann that now bringing kids to other institutions in Riverdale, okay, which then begs the question: were other institutions involved other than the church? Now, we're not saying that they were. We're just saying, though, that we're now reading about a network of high elite pedophiles in Riverdale who were passing children around like trading cards.
And it also says they brought them to Manhattan, doesn't it?
Now check out where else they brought them. And this is going to really interest everybody who remembers us from the Son of Sam days. The maestro also brought the boy to the Church of the Sacred Heart in Yonkers, where he was made to join the brass quartet and introduced to 3 monks. So this now brings in Karen Wallstrom into the picture.
In Karen Wallstrom, and it brings in also John Ranieri.
Correct. Although Ranieri didn't go to Sacred Heart, he went to Yonkers High School.
Well, but he walked around like a Capuchin monk, and he had known Karen Wallstrom according to what he declared before.
Correct. So not to get too far afield so John doesn't understand what we're talking about anymore. Basically Sacred Heart, John, when we first started talking about Son of Sam and we started realizing that there were elite pedophile networks up in Yonkers, Sacred Heart Church became a focal point of our investigation. And we spoke to people who were abused, not at Sacred Heart, but in that milieu around Sacred Heart, in that whole neighborhood of North Broadway and Lake Avenue and all that. And if Mike Lorenzo is still in the chat. He'll attest. He went to Sacred Heart. He'll attest to that there were a lot of pedophiles up in that area, pederasts and pedophiles. Now, again, we're not making connections to the dome. I want people to understand. But what we're starting to see here, and this is just me speaking, I am not speaking for John and I am not speaking for Eric, but what we're seeing here is that the elite circles who were trading kids like trading cards around the neighborhood and even up in Yonkers, they were probably very well connected to the Riverdale neighborhood house people and the Howells and all of those elite people as well. All we have to do now is find those connections. Not that we're going to say that those people committed crimes, but again, we are looking and seeing that these things are existing in Riverdale, Yonkers, and it's just very intriguing that this whole milieu is now involved in pedophile rings.
And it crosses over into Manhattan in that article.
Right.
And it was quite satanic and ritual, because in that article, Manny, you read where these Franciscans are wearing pink underwear and pink panties, like walking in.
Oh, right. Yeah. Here it says that the monks, whom the music teacher said were known as the monks with the pink underwear, also abused Seeger. Now, it's possible that Seeger's full of shit. Because here we are saying, here we are with Mike Lorenzo. I am from the Sacred Heart Parish, went to school for 12 years. There were no, quote, monks, but I am sure there was some shit going on.
Yeah.
So in either case, this is just an interesting little aside, a little tangent off of the dome. Not that we're saying that it was related to the dome. I want to make that absolutely crystal clear for everybody in the audience. But interesting networks here in Riverdale that we're finding of these, again, the thing that we always find when we look deeply. Elite pedophiles.
Right.
So anyway, John, that was a great show. We're super happy. We're past 2 hours, which we didn't think we were going to go. So we're going to end this very soon. But before we do, we just want to give you the opportunity to give the audience your last word and anything you want to let that you want to make the audience clear about before we leave.
Well, I just want to, I mean, it's because there was never anybody to, kind of discuss this with. So it's like kind of, like anything else in one's life, that you have to be able to, even to vent, you have to be able to talk to somebody who has some remote connection to, I mean, there are people I care about very deeply and all of that, but they've had experiences that I'm have zero connection to, and I can't really I'm like, oh, I'm sorry you had that problem, but that doesn't kind of connect.
You can't relate, right?
Whereas by being able to discuss this in a venue where there are people who have some familiarity with the scene, it is a helpful experience.
Right. And of course, one of the things that happened in our Son of Sam series was that it snowballed upon itself. Once people started telling their stories, other people then realized that they had to use the liberal term, they had a safe space, quote unquote, in order to come and tell their stories. So we're hoping, of course, that by John telling his story, which again wasn't a story of physical abuse or sexual abuse, but it was a story of mental abuse, in my opinion, that clearly had an effect on John. I think that that maybe it'll jog the memories of some other people out there, because again, we're looking at this holistically. We don't want to just hear that Piser was an angel. We want to hear about the entire man and the experience that all the kids had with him, not just the original Dome people. All right, John. So, hey, man, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And please,
both of you,
please hang out until we're done, so we can say goodbye off the air. Okay.
Okay.
All right. You did great. And Eric, any final words?
Well, a great guest. I did want to ask him, and I didn't get a chance. How did he come to work as a minor at the Riverdale neighborhood house, and were there other youth groups there before the Dome for children.
Well, we got him, so might as well.
Well, I was at my quote unquote job was I was a day camp counselor, and there were a lot of other people that doing that type of work, and it was just kind of. And
were there other youth groups there though before the dome where children and adolescents could go?
Well, it was a completely separate organization. I mean, which I don't want to get into it now because we've already talked too much. But I mean, it was the Riverdale, the center at 141, which was open on Friday and Saturday nights.
Right. Well, we're gonna get into that with Alphonse Gavila next week. So he's coming.
Right.
He's gonna come on our show with yet another story about Piser that people might want to tune into.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, John. All right, Eric. Any last words?
Another excellent show, and I quickly want to tell Miss Linda Schaefer that Alfred Hunt Howell Sr. is related to the Hunt steel magnate family in Pennsylvania, and that quite possibly what Book Club pointed out, that people in Riverdale don't consider themselves to be of the Bronx, that could be a carryover from it belonging to Yonkers before, as the historian told us.
No, it's strictly socioeconomic. We don't consider ourselves, like I do. I mean, I always say I'm from the Bronx. I never say I'm from Riverdale, but quite a few people say Riverdale as opposed to the Bronx.
Very good indeed. Well, anyway, Linda Schaefer, it is the same family, the steel magnate Hunt family.
All right, Eric, thank you so much, my man, and we'll see you at the next show, and I'm going to hang out for me at the end, and I'm going to take the audience on out. All right, guys, well, thank you so much for watching today. Great show. I'm really enjoying these shows, not only because, of course, I'm learning about this place I've been obsessed with ever since I was 4 years old, when I was actually in the dome and wondering what the hell I was doing there. Still to this day, haven't gotten a good answer about that. But this series is also turning into a sort of a love story and history lesson about the neighborhood that I grew up in. And I'm learning things that are fascinating me that I never knew. And we're seeing pictures of areas that I walk around in every day, and I never knew what they look like. And of course, speaking to actual people who were there is the icing on the cake for everything. But remember, guys, as I say a million times, you can't have sickness without health. You can't have good darkness without light. And just as you can't have those two, you cannot have good without the bad. And just remember that as we go along in this study of the Seton Park Dome. All right, guys, take care, and we'll see you at the next show. Thank you very much.